win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more.
You almost think they just polled the demonstrators because what people were saying in the streets and at state capitals and on the National Mall on Saturday is pretty much in keeping with what the public at large was telling pollsters who were in the field at the same time. Here's what I mean. Quote, do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? Disapprove by a margin of 12 points. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling the federal workforce? Disapprove by a margin of 13 points. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling foreign policy? Disapprove by a margin of 14 points. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling the economy? Disapprove by a margin of 15 points. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Trump is handling trade? Disapprove by a margin of 16 points. All right, well, how about this one? How about his signature issue, a thing that he actually did run on when he campaigned for president, a thing he really most wants to be associated with, the policy that he most wants you to identify with him and his name. Do you think, American public, do you think it is a good thing, his signature issue? Here's the way the question was phrased. Thinking about the short term, do you think President Trump's tariffs will help or hurt the U.S. economy? The proportion of Americans who say Trump's tariffs gonna help, 22%. The proportion of Americans who say Trump's tariffs will hurt us is 72%. So by a 50-point margin, Americans believe that Donald Trump is deliberately hurting us with his big signature policy idea of these genius tariffs. By a 50-point margin, Americans say what he's doing is hurtful to us deliberately. Which brings us to what I mentioned at the top, our spelunking expedition together this evening, our exploration of caves. The incident of Donald Trump caving today that's getting the most attention, understandably so, is his panicked cave, his panicked U-turn on tariffs. For all his famed and supposed attention to the stock market, I got to tell you, Donald Trump has been very happy to preside over huge off-the-cliff plunges in the stock market repeatedly. In fact, in history, if you look at the Dow Jones, if you look at the 10 largest single-day point drops in the Dow in history, of the 10 worst point drops ever on the Dow, Donald Trump was the president for 9 of those 10 days. Some were in his first term, some were this past week with the tariffs debacle. Yeah. He was president for 9 of the 10 worst one-day point drops on the Dow. And you might say there's, the takeaway message there is, wow, why would any Wall Street person, any business person, anyone with a single share of stock, anyone with a retirement account, why would any of those folks ever support this particular person for president? Reasonable question. But the other takeaway here is about him and not just how good or not he is for stocks. The other takeaway here, I think it's fair to say, is that he doesn't much care about tanking the stock market all the time. It's like a day that ends in Y for him. He's famous for doing it. What happened today that was different? After all his remaining tariff threats went into effect at midnight last night, what happened today was not that the stock market tanked. It did at the beginning of the day with the tariffs in place, but that's, again, normal for a day with Donald Trump at the wheel. What was different today was not that the stock market tanked again, right? It was that the bond market tanked at the beginning of the day. And you don't have to know that much about the markets to know that when things go crazy economically, and even sometimes when things just go crazy in other ways, people rush to put their money somewhere safe. And for decades, for the entire span of America's global economic dominance, the safe place that people have run to when stuff is crazy has been U.S. bonds, American Treasury bonds, because when the world is going nuts, for whatever reason, you can at least count on the full faith and credit of the government of the United States of America. right? So usually bad economic times mean that people want to buy lots of T-bills, lots of treasury bonds. That's the safe harbor. But we're in a new environment now, because it turns out something different happens when the reason things are crazy is that the U.S. government itself is crazy. It's that the U.S. president has grabbed the wheel, and he doesn't drink, so we know he's not drunk, but boy, he sure is driving like he's drunk. I mean, when the problem is the actions of the U.S. government, instead of fleeing to the U.S. government for safety, now people flee away from the U.S. government to find safety. And so unlike every other economic crisis in modern history, people in this economic crisis, induced by Donald Trump, people today, at the beginning of the day, started selling their T-bills, started selling their U.S. treasuries. A lot, a lot, a lot. And that is not just an inversion of typical economic behavior. That indicates an inversion of America's role in the world as the dominant economy. Also, in practical terms, a sell-off like that in the U.S. bond market, I mean, that portends a way bigger economic disaster for the United States than Trump tanking the stock market over the past week. Right? The bond market falling apart is a much bigger deal than the stock market falling apart in terms of the fundamentals of who we are in the world and how our money and our economy works. Because the stability of the U.S. bond market is what we depend on essentially for the spine of our economy. Everything from mortgage rates in the housing market to the integrity of our multi-trillion-dollar national debt. So yes, the stock market stuff under Trump has been scary, but if the bond market blows up, say goodbye to the U.S. economy. And today, what happened is the bond market started blowing up. When that happened at the opening of the bond markets today, that's apparently what turned things around. That's how we discovered this lovely cave that Donald Trump led us into today on his tariff policy. NBC News reports tonight that Trump reversed course on his tariff gambit today because of, quote, deep concern bordering on panic from his top economic officials regarding the bond markets. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, not always allies in the various tariff debates at the White House, nevertheless presented a united front today to the president, urging a pause on what he was doing on tariffs, a pause, quote, over concerns about the bond markets. My colleague Chris Hayes, I think, nutted up what happened here very well today. He posted this on Blue Sky. Quote, you set the house on fire, watched it burn, and then lost your nerve and put it out. You now have a partially burned house. Great job. Exactly. But don't lose sight of some of the other lovely caves on our spelunking tour today. For example, this one, headline, Associated Press, Trump administration says it cut funding to some life-saving UN food programs by mistake. Quote, the State Department says it has rolled back an undisclosed number of sweeping funding cuts to UN World Food Program emergency projects in 14 countries, saying it had terminated some of the contracts for life-saving aid, quote, by mistake. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce told reporters, quote, there were a few programs that were cut in other countries that were not meant to be cut. Bruce said she had no immediate information on which countries had U.S. funding restored. She gave no explanation for how some contracts came to be canceled in error. Oops. Yeah, we have no idea. So I guess we'll put them back. We don't even know how we're making these mistakes. We know it's a mistake, but we don't even know what the mistake is. But rest assured, we know what we're doing, and if you criticize us, watch out. But, you know, just as Chris noted, as he said, you know, even after panicking and putting out the house fire you started, you still have a partially burned house. There's still damage done, even as they try to reverse all of these mistakes they're making. You still have a partially burned house, just as Chris noted there. The New York Times is reporting tonight that even some of the critical programs that the Trump administration said they didn't mean to cut apparently are still cut. Quote, quote, last week some officials were given lists of contracts and awards that remained active. But by the weekend, many of those projects had been axed. Then on Tuesday, yesterday, some of the programs were restored with little explanation. But now, still, the administration has, quote, slashed many of the programs it had pledged to preserve. They cannot explain what they're doing. They cannot defend what they're doing. They cannot commit to what they're doing. But they also can't even reverse what they're doing when they try to reverse it, because they are so incompetent they can't even fail properly. They're like a baby just mashing down the buttons on a keyboard with no idea what the buttons do, except the keyboard isn't hooked up to like a, I don't know, a word processor or a video game. The keyboard is the controls to a life support machine that has a patient on it. What do these buttons do? Oops. Still, though, the caves keep on coming. Last night we reported over a couple of different segments of the show on the disturbing, seemingly calamitous collapse of Social Security. These have been just some of the headlines just in the past couple of days. Washington Post, long waits, website crashes. Social Security is breaking down. The New York Times, quote, just a mess. Staff cuts, rushed changes, and anxiety at Social Security. Quote, the system is groaning under the pressure. This was Business Insider yesterday afternoon. Quote, AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, sounds the alarm on Social Security's, quote, startling and sudden decline in customer service, and warns of more to come. This was the LA Times today. Quote, it's a shambles. Doge cuts bring chaos and long waits at Social Security for seniors. The wrecking of Social Security, Donald Trump's wrecking of Social Security, Trump's wrecking of the Social Security system that tens of millions of Americans rely on, many as their primary source of income when they don't have other options to supplement it with anything else. It is just a practical and moral catastrophe. It also ought to be a political catastrophe for those who have brought this on the American people. The failings at Social Security are now final.
Straight question. Are you confused? Comment section now. Have you had enough? Comment section now. Are you tired? I think it's a deliberate policy to put as much chaos out there just so people think, you know what, I don't want politics today. I've had enough. Let them get on with it. Because if you try and keep up with the pace of the nonsense, the BS, the lies, the garbage, you get like all over the place. And they're playing a great game at the moment. You've got to give it the administration. What's that comedian? Bill Maher, whatever, rocks up to the White House, used as a prop, I should point out. And that's how the administration has got at the moment. Your former, should we call them liberals? And now, like, welcome to the White House, because it's like there's just no checking going on. They can say what they like, and it appears to be nobody is coming up to say anything against them. Comment section, please, if you've got any idea of what happens on day 101. Is the confusion going to continue, or is it just all a game? Because one thing Bill Maher said, he rocked up and said to the White House, he says, the Trump you see on the TV.
I'll take you up on that. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your perspective. As I just said, you did found the world's largest hedge fund. You have been in this field for more than 50 years. It's worth pointing out to our viewers, I think it's important to note you consider yourself to be apolitical, and you say that the tariff problem is a symptom of a much greater problem. What do you mean by that?
There's a financial problem. There's an imbalance problem. There are basically 5 big forces through history that drive everything. First, there's the money, credit, debt, economic cycle in which there's a building up of debt in a cyclical way that becomes too large, and we're going to have problems. We're going to have a government debt problem. Maybe we can get into this. The second big force through time is the internal conflict force. The left and the right, differences in wealth and values causing a conflict that we're seeing it changing our political order. So the first is changing our monetary order. The second is changing our political order internally. And then the third is the great world order, how countries deal with each other when there's a rising power challenging an existing power. And now we are going from multilateralism, which is largely an American world order type of thing, to a unilateral world order in which there's great conflict. And the other two factors all through history have been acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics. And number four is technology changing. And how they are coming together are the main forces behind this. For example, there can't be imbalances anymore in that environment.
Do you think that President Trump's tariffs are exacerbating what you are describing, this complicated mix of challenges that the world is facing?
I think it's just a function of how well they're handled. You know, it's a reality that it's a desire to bring in tax revenue from that. It's a reality that we would like to build manufacturing and jobs here. This is a reality. That's how that's done, whether that's done in a practical way, whether that's done in a stable way, whether that's done with quality negotiations in which that's a mutual problem, or whether that's done in a chaotic and disruptive way that produces great conflict, makes all the difference in the world.
Based on what you're seeing right now, do you think that these tariffs are being carried out in a practical way or a chaotic way?
I think we'll see. So far, very disruptive. So far, very disruptive, right? And so we don't know what the numbers are. But that could be part of a process, right? It depends where we are at the end of the 90 days. Because what was put there is like throwing rocks into the production system. And those impacts would be enormous in terms of the efficiency of the whole world, great cost.
I want to ask you about something that's on a lot of people's minds, your predictions for the future. And I want to start with the R word. I know you think this is just a piece of it. Of course, I'm talking about a recession. Do you think it is likely that the United States will dip into a recession because of President Trump's tariffs?
I think that right now we are at a decision-making point and very close to a recession. And I'm worried about something worse than a recession if this isn't handled well. A recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP, and whether it goes slightly there, we always have those things. We have something that's much more profound. We have a breaking down of the monetary order. We are going to change the monetary order because we cannot spend the amounts of money, so we have that problem. And when we talk about the dollar and we talk about tariffs, we have that. We are having profound changes in our domestic order, how ruling is existing, and we're having profound changes in the world order. Such times are very much like the 1930s. I've studied history, and this repeats over and over again. So if you take tariffs, if you take debt, if you take the rising power challenging the existing power, if you take those factors and look at the factors, those changes in the orders, the systems, are very, very disruptive. How that's handled could produce something that is much worse than a recession, or it could be handled well. Let's take the debt situation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, very quickly, because I want to be very specific about what you mean. You're saying worse than recession. You're saying this is reminiscent of the 1930s. We should tell our viewers you correctly predicted the 2008 financial crisis. What is your prediction for where the country is headed right now?
Right now, we're at a juncture. Let's take the budget. The budget deficit can be reduced to 3% of GDP. It will be about 7% if things are not changed. If it could be reduced to about 3% of GDP, and these trade deficits and so on are managed in the right way, this could all be managed very well. I believe that members of Congress should take the pledge, what I call the 3% pledge, that in one way or another, that they will get that budget deficit down to that number. If they don't, we're going to have a supply-demand problem for debt at the same time as we have these other problems. And the results of that will be worse than a normal recession.
So, and just to follow up on that point, worse than a recession, you're talking about the 1930s. What specifically are you warning of? Are you saying that it could be as bad as a depression? What's your biggest fear?
The value of money What is a storehold of wealth? That is a bond. In other words, one man's debt is another man's assets, bondholders. And so we're going to be in a situation where if that storehold of wealth is in jeopardy because there's too much supply and demand and so on, and we have a monetary inflation, we will have great disruptions. And that could be like the breakdown of the monetary system in 71. It could be like 2008. It's going to be very severe. I think it could be more severe than those if these other matters simultaneously occur. Imagine if we have a downturn politically and an international conflict.
What's worst case scenario that you're warning of? To be very specific, to put it into terms people can
very
understand.
specific. The value of money, internal conflict, that is not the normal democracy as we know it, and international conflict in a way that is highly disruptive to the world economy and could even be a military conflict, just as these breakdowns have occurred before. You know, we have a new order that began in 1945, a new monetary order and a new geopolitical order. And these go in cycles that can be measured. And I worry about the breakdown of that kind of an order, particularly since it doesn't need to happen, because there are certain things that could be done in which this is better, a better restructuring of these debts and actions taken.
So that takes me to my next question. You have this book, How Countries Go Broke, The Big Cycle. What is the solution here?
Well, there are a series of solutions, but let's take the most important.
And we have 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. 3% of GDP, bring that deficit down. It can be done in a bipartisan way, the way it was done between 1991 and 98. I explained how that could be done, doing things together for the greater good. And then internationally on all of these issues, to use American strength, but to negotiate well, to lay out ways in which bad conflict and inefficient policies don't create great disruptions, but get us through this in an orderly way.
Little pain.
Babe, how much did we lose today?
Little pain.
$1 million?
And yesterday?
$4 million?
Little
And
pain.
yesterday?
$1 billion?
Tariff Awards, we're going to celebrate the most outstanding achievements in international economic blunders.
Holy fucking shit. Holy shit.
You should probably dial in. Holy fuck.
Win so much, you may even get tired of winning, and you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win.
The most outstanding achievements in international economic blunders. Tonight's ceremony is brought to you by the letter T for tariffs, trade wars, and Trump's terrific tantrums. And Tony. Let's dive into our first category, best impersonation of a bull in a china shop. And the nominees are, oh wait, it's a one-man show. Guess who? Donald Trump and his performance in Tariff, The Art of the Squill, imposing a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, and a 10% tariff on China and Europe. Watch out, you may be getting one too. Trump has managed to ruffle more feathers than a fox in a henhouse. Moving on to outstanding achievement in alienating allies. I said, you watch out. Trump's tariffs have prompted Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to retaliate with, well, his own set of tariffs, which include a 25% hit on $155 billion worth of American goods. Wow. Trudeau stated, we will not be pushed around. Kind of looks like the bromance is officially over, folks, although I'm sure Melania was hanging in somewhere for a little bit of a cheek action. In the category of best comedy in economic policy, we have Trump's justification for the tariffs, blaming Canada, well, why not, for the influx of fentanyl into the US. Yes, because, let's be honest, when we think of dangerous drug cartels, well, I definitely think of maple syrup loving Canadians. Yeah, first on the list. The Wall Street Journal didn't hold back, calling it the dumbest trade war in history. That gets... should get a nomination all in itself for the headline. Next up, Best supporting role in a trade war. And the award goes to Mexico, whose President Claudia Sheinbaum announced plans for retaliatory tariffs on US goods. She stated, "We will defend Mexico's interests." It's like a telenova, but with more avocados and less romance. Now, let's not forget the Lifetime Achievement Award in Economic Self-Harm. Trump's tariffs are expected to cost the average US household, wait for this, about $830 annually. That's just for the eggs. It's the gift that keeps on taking. In a surprise twist, the best original excuse for inflation goes to Trump for saying, "Tariffs don't cause inflation, they cause success." There. Tell that to the American consumers facing high prices and everything. As I said, from X to electronics. But hey, who needs affordable goods when you can have success? It's the golden age of, well, eggs, I suppose. Talking about laying gold eggs. Finally, the People's Choice Award for Unwanted Economic Policy goes to, another drum roll, rubbish drum roll, you guessed it, the tariffs. A recent poll shows that Americans are actually overwhelmingly opposed to the new tariffs. It's hardly surprising. Many are fearing, or joking apart, increased prices and economic instability. Trump calls it pain. It looks like this policy is about as popular as a skunk at a garden party. He really did call it pain. You've got to go through a little bit of pain, and MAGA don't mind now. Ladies and gentlemen, that actually concludes our tariff awards for the evening. Pain's on the way, by the way. Remember, in the world of international trade, as in Hollywood, it's all about who you know, how much you charge them, and how dramatically you can mess it all up. Good night, good day, goodbye, and may your imports be ever duty-free.